My name is Danielle LaSusa, and this is my free online practical philosophy class called the Existential Crisis of Parenthood. This is sort of my area of interest and my area of expertise, but I want to tell you a little bit about me first. I am a philosophical coach, which means I have a PhD in philosophy, and I use that training to kind of serve people in working through issues in their everyday lives. I'm also a writer and a speaker, and I have a podcast called Think Hard. We haven't put out new episodes in about a year, and I think we probably are finished, but there's a 3-year archive there to listen to and lots of really great content. So I encourage you to listen to that. So a little bit about my work. So philosophical coach is something that is just sort of a made-up job, but didn't used to be. So I just wanted to say that philosophers used to be kind of the original counselors and therapists before therapy was a thing. Psychology as a discipline wasn't its own entity, its own distinct discipline until about the mid-19th century. And so before that, if you wanted advice about how to live your life, you would go see either a philosopher or a priest, probably. So philosophers have actually been doing this kind of work for a long time, and it's starting to kind of come back in vogue as one of the things that philosophers are doing now. Okay, I'm going to try and just make sure there's nobody else in the waiting room here that I got to let in. Okay, and we're good. Okay, so back to my screen. Okay. So as I said about me, I use my PhD in philosophy to help people sort of think clearly, choose wisely, and live purposefully. And I specialize in helping moms grapple with what it means to make a human being. This sort of existential crisis of parenting is kind of my specialty. My services include one-on-one philosophical coaching. I also do workshops, and I also have a course called The Meaning of Motherhood, which I will talk about a little bit later. And it's a new online version of it that's available to register for now. So I'm really excited about it. So today we're going to cover parenthood and how it disrupts your sense of identity and meaning and values and purpose and responsibility and all of those things. It is a completely overwhelming transition, and we're going to talk about some of the ways in which it's overwhelming. We're also going to talk about the ways in which parenthood can put you not only into a crisis of what does it mean to be a person, but also what does it mean to be able to feel like you know what you're doing, right? I think it can be a crisis of confidence as well, and leaves you feeling like you don't really know what you're doing in any area of your life, work, parenthood, etc. Excuse me, I've been inhaling forest fire smoke for the last 4 days. So we'll also talk about why no one really talks about parenthood this way. And I think that that's a real shame. And I think it's a real way in which we need to really change the way that we think about the way that we think about how we discuss parenthood in this culture. And then we're going to talk about how to find and connect with like-minded people who are also grappling with the groundlessness of parenthood. And then we will, if there's interest, we'll have a volunteer to do kind of live coaching with me. And then we'll have a Q&A, and you can ask any questions that you have. So I just want to say, also, this is being recorded and shared. I encourage you to show up and kind of be part of that in whatever way you feel comfortable with. But I do think it's helpful to be able to see you. I think people learn by watching other people learn. So there's something important about that. I also want to say that today what I'm offering, as always, is just sort of based on my own study and my own experience and my own sort of thinking about these issues in an intensive way. But if there's anything that I say that feels like I've missed something important, or if it doesn't quite resonate with you, that's fine. Take what works for you, leave the rest. And then the nice thing about philosophy is that it really encourages a sense of discourse and dialogue, right? It's about being able to talk even when we disagree. And the goal for philosophers in theory is trying to kind of talk our way to truth. So I encourage you to have a conversation with me as we try and talk our way and figure out what the truth of the matter is here. Okay, so parenthood and motherhood in particular is often thought to look a bit like this. We think that motherhood or parenthood is supposed to be like in a field, glowing. You know, a new baby is supposed to look like this. It's like a white lady in a white room, looking very happy. Here's another one. I love this picture because it's just like, it's all of the things that we are told that parenthood is supposed to look like. It's like glowing white light. I don't know how you could possibly keep a couch that white when you have a child, but this is what we are told parenthood is supposed to be, what it's supposed to look like. And here is what a family is supposed to look like. And you will notice there's some, yes, I have chosen these pictures, but I think that that kind of idealized version of a family is homogenous in a certain way, right? Certain race and class and way of looking. And the truth of the matter is that, you know, these are just messages that we're told, right? Parenthood is supposed to be a certain way. And I want to know actually from you all what you would fill in the blank here with when you say parenthood is supposed to be. I gave you some images of what I think, you know, what the messages are there, but what's some language that you would give? What words fill in the blank there? Go ahead and put it in the chat and tell me what you think. Sigita said fulfilling. Yeah. What else? An amazing experience. Yeah. Everyone tells you it's just an amazing experience. Easy. Easy. Yeah. Yeah. If people say that parenthood is easy, their experience is different than mine. A great challenge. I like that one. Yeah, that it's like challenging, but like in all the best ways, right? As though it fits right into the rest of your life without a conflict, right? That I like that that way of talking about how it's easy. It's just like, oh, well, just I can have my life as it was before. I have my career, I have my partner, I have my home, I have my life, and I just have a kid, and then I just like fold that seamlessly into my life. And then I've got all the pieces where I want them. Yeah. Yeah, these are about the same words that I came up with. So I said it's supposed to be joyful, fulfilling, beautiful, full of love, challenging, but in all the best ways, right? When really it looks more like this. I don't know about your house, but in those early days, it looked a bit like this. And then as, you know, time passed, kid gets a little older, it looks kind of like this. And then some of that, and then some of that, just crying alone in the bedroom. At least that's how it was in my household. And this is, I think, not only are we feeling these things when we are parents, because this is part of parenthood, right? It's the part that gets glossed over in those like sun-soaked white rooms with the joyful parents. The part that gets glossed over is that it's challenging, and challenging in a way that touches the deepest wounds and the most heartbreaking regrets and all of these, like the stuff that we're made of is what parenthood touches upon, right? The being of our being is what comes up. I actually went to signed up for like an online talk with a Zen Buddhist master yesterday, and I asked a question, and I said that I have a 4-year-old, and he said, "Oh, that is a spiritual journey. You are on the spiritual path." Because it is. Having a child is it's a challenge to the very being of being human, I think. And so, of course, we're going to meet that with some of this screaming and crying experience. And part of that is because the experience of being human of making a human rather, comes with huge questions. And I just want to say, I recognize that not every parent has birthed a child. Not every parent, has a partner who's birthed a child, that there are many paths to parenthood. Nevertheless, you are trying to raise a human being, whether or not you yourself have been active in sort of the creation of that human being. You're trying to mold and shape a human being into a fully formed person. And that challenges our own ability to think and communicate to another person what it means to be a human being, right? This is like foundational stuff. And it comes with these huge questions, these huge shifts in identity. So the first question that I often had and that I see in my clients after a baby, it's like, well, who am I now? Like, what do I care about? What do I value? It may have been that before kids, you cared about, all sorts of things. But for me, it was like some large percentage of my brain went to figuring out like which next boots I was going to buy. Fashion was like a really big part of my mental space. I enjoyed it. I like fashion, and I spent a lot of time thinking about what I was going to wear, and then that's just out the window, right? My relationship to my work and my career has totally changed. What might have felt like a really important, critical project at work before now seems totally unimportant once this baby arrives. And now, given the state of the world right now, between COVID-19, the devastation and fires impacting the West Coast, and all of the famine and people who are displaced from their homes and wars that have been happening around the world. I mean, there's so much now to feel like we have to care about. And it's really overwhelming. And then you introduce a child into that world, and suddenly things really shift. And it makes us question sort of the fundamental purpose of being alive, right? Because of all these crises right now, a lot of us are really grappling with the questions of what is important, what is really truly important, what is something that I really truly care about, where are my priorities? And that same thing happens when you bring a child into the world, when you start raising a child of your own, and then you put those two things together, and it's like, not only do I have to figure out what the meaning or purpose of life is for myself, but what am I going to do and share with that child? And how do I know, right? Am I supposed to be happy? What is happiness? What does happiness look like? How do I teach happiness? What does happiness even mean? What does success even mean? There's the huge question of what does it mean for a person that didn't exist before to now exist? I know for me, it may be because I'm a philosopher, that was a really, really destabilizing part of the equation. I felt like I had gotten closer to the membrane between life and death. It was like there's existence and non-existence, and I had seen a being cross over the threshold. And I felt really close to that threshold, because not only is this being in existence now, but your job as a parent is to make sure that it stays on this side of that membrane, right? You've got to keep this little being alive, and it's so, especially as a newborn, so dependent, so fragile, and you are fully responsible for this being in a way that makes you think about life and death in ways that I was never accustomed to before a child. There may be, people may have experiences where they have done that, but I think for a lot of us, that's the closest we get to life and death matters, is when we suddenly are responsible for a life. It's big stuff, right? So then we have to ask ourselves, like, okay, we've brought this child into the world. We're now on this membrane between life and death. Now we got to figure out how to be in the world. And the world is full of suffering. And as I said, we are experiencing so much suffering right now. We are experiencing so much intensity, and the feeling of, fear and all of these things that come with that experience of suffering. We need to figure out how to manage it. We need to figure out how to teach our children to manage it. And we also, the experience of suffering in a way becomes kind of amplified, because not only are we dealing with how do we maintain ourselves in this human life, this lifetime, but suddenly now we've got another lifetime, our child's lifetime, and then possibly, if they have kids, their child's lifetime. And suddenly the feeling of grappling with suffering goes far beyond ourselves into the future. And the meaning of our lives goes far beyond ourselves into the future. So our sense of time also shifts in huge ways, right? Again, we are dealing with like the most fundamental part of what it means to be alive, right? Meaning, identity, time, death, mortality, right? These are the foundational questions for philosophers in particular, and I think for all of us in some way, right? And then with that comes all of these huge emotions, right? All of these emotions, and what we, how do we deal with any of this? How do we feel all of these things? And I want to just take a minute to ask you what sort of emotions you have been dealing with as people who have been grappling with parenthood or thinking about parenthood. What are the emotions that have come up? And I assume you've been dealing with some of these big questions, and let me know if any of these have resonated with you so far. What hits? Take a minute to let you give a little feedback.
I'm not going to chat because it's easier to just speak, but sure. I mean, for me, just as you mentioned, the state of the world, like when we chose to have this child, the world didn't quite look like it does now. So how do I navigate that? How do I set him up for success? And how do I ensure that he is going to be a positive contributor and not just going to like keep going down this landslide that in particular the United States is currently on? So it's been a lot of that, a lot of this like desire to become expats and leave, but that doesn't actually solve any of it, because it's not just here, and it's bigger than politics. And I just have always felt a huge responsibility as a boy mom in particular to make sure I'm raising a good human. And that has just deepened further and further as time has passed since he was born.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that this year, it's like, in a way, it is what we have been told by so many, climate scientists and people sort of looking into the future, saying like, look, things are going to get intense. They're going to get bad, right? Global population is booming, and there are things coming, and suddenly they're at our doorstep in a way that just we didn't. We could not have really understood what that would mean for us until it's happening. And I think that you're right, Marissa, in that it's now that we're here, the experience of suffering and grappling with the like, what is it going to look like in 5 years or 20 years or 50 years? What is it going to look like for my kids and my grandkids if I have any? Sigita says, the crushing responsibility in keeping alive and raising properly, in quotes, using the time that we have efficiently. Yeah, that's just, that second one is, or the third one there, using the time we have efficiently, I think is a really hard one, right? You feel sort of harried all the time. And that issue of like what it means to raise properly, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, because I feel that one too. It looks like I didn't properly set this up here, so I'll just put these out. So here are some of the emotions that I have been feeling, or was feeling, particularly as a new parent and now as a parent of a 4-year-old. Ambivalence. So, you know, the supposed to was like, it's supposed to be easy and joyful and love and beautiful and maybe challenging, but in all the best ways, right? But really what the experience is ambivalence, right? So I just want to say ambivalence is the experience of like feeling multiple things at the same time, right? Or feeling at least 2 things at the same time, and both of them being true, right? Ambi, both, valence, sides, right? So 2 sides, like it's we are feeling both of those things at the same time. And those both things could be like love, connection, joy, compassion, empathy, and also wanting to get the hell out of here and just like leave my house, leave, like put the kid down, right? On the one hand, you want your baby, especially as a new parent, if you're nursing, for example, nursing mother, it's like, oh, I just want this baby around me all the time. And it's, you know, she smells so good, and like the skin to skin is so wonderful. And then, you know, 20 minutes later, you're just like, oh, get this kid off of me, right? I want to be close and I want to be independent. I want to consume you completely and I want to run for the hills, right? It is like we feel both of these things at the same time. We feel a lot of these things on this side at the same time, and it's confusing, right? We're often told that like we're supposed to be able to like follow our emotions, and the emotions will lead us to what we're supposed to do next. And when our emotions are all over the place, we don't quite know what to do, right? So we may feel confused. We may feel some regret. I know that's sort of like a dirty word to say about new parenthood, that like that feeling of like, oh, did I make a mistake, right? Like having a baby is just it's a non-refundable experience. It's a one-way ticket. You just do it, and there you are. And sometimes we have feelings of regret about that, you know, moments at least. And then we feel like bad parents or bad people because we're never supposed to regret our decisions. We feel an incredible amount of uncertainty, at least right now, and the fear that is associated with that uncertainty, the anxiety, right, the worry about the future. We may feel an extreme amount of grief as we transition to parenthood, that feeling of I'm grieving my old life, I'm grieving my old self. And right now, given all of the intensity that's happening in the world, it could be I'm grieving the life that my child might have in this strange new world, right? And at the same time, you may be feeling compassion and empathy and love and those positive, overwhelming feelings that are actually sometimes a little scary because we feel them in a way that it feels very intense, right? This kind of, I know when my daughter was born, it was like, I feel this kind of like ferocious love that I don't quite understand, and I feel a little freaked out by this kind of like, you know, don't you touch my kid, right? That protectiveness that is just primal. It can feel a little weird. We can feel completely helpless. I feel that right now. I'm sure many of you do, that the world feels big and scary and you just want to protect your child so much, and you're doing the best that you can, and there are some things that you just know that you cannot protect them from. And that feeling comes with fear, grief, and dread. You know, I think that the word dread is appropriate. And the dread of being alive and worrying about our children and whether our children will outlive us. You know, it's a deep fear, and it's a little dark to talk about, but I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we are worrying about the very, life and death here. This is what we're talking about. And right now in 2020, a lot of us are feeling that much more acutely. So, so this is a quote I wanted to share from Sarah Mankedek, who wrote this wonderful book called Ordinary Insanity: Fear and the Silent Crisis of Motherhood in America. And she says, women becoming mothers are in the process of learning the excruciating lesson that everything is terribly uncertain. There is no bigger unknown than the birth and development of a baby into its own human being. And truly, I can't think of a bigger unknown. Like, we do not know what's going to happen as our children grow up. We never know who they're going to be exactly. We think like maybe they're going to be little versions of us or our partners, but they have this pesky way of being stubbornly their own independent people, that we can't really anticipate who they're going to be and what it's going to be like for them. So it's an incredible amount of uncertainty. I remember when my daughter was born, I was like, oh, having a baby is it's a lifelong process of accepting uncertainty. You have to accept it. It's part of the deal. All right, some more huge questions. What are my ethical responsibilities? So Marissa, you sort of spoke to that when you said, I feel like I want my child to kind of grow up and be someone who can contribute positively to the world. And what does that look like? And what does that mean? And I'm talking with clients right now who are saying they're feeling this kind of two different poles themselves. They're like, I want to stay here in the US and fight the good fight and help people and sort of fight for justice and support my community. And I also really, really want to protect my family and protect my kid. And I have an ethical responsibility to my child. And sometimes those things feel like they're in conflict. And so I have an ethical responsibility to the world, and I have an ethical responsibility to my child. And what do I do when I feel like those things are in conflict? And we don't really have any training to talk about this. Like we don't grow up and like that's part, reading, reading, writing, arithmetic, and like ethical reasoning. Like that last one is not in our school system. We assume that parents are the ones that are going to be teaching that to their kids. And so here we are, we're the ones responsible for teaching that to our kids without really having a whole lot of modeling outside our own parents. And the world is changing so fast. And our relationships to our own families might be troubled in some ways. And so a lot of times we're left feeling like we don't have good models or good know-how for how to do this. So that's the next question. How do I know what to do? We're here going like, well, what is the right thing? And here's an example. So, I was talking about the sort of the big disasters, but even when it comes down to things like you want to get your baby to sleep, right? And you're just like, newborns don't sleep. They're on their own schedule. You got to figure out how it goes. And every new parent is just like, hey, how do I get my baby to sleep? And so I don't know about you, but I read all the books and I was just like, I got to figure out what is the right way to get my baby to sleep. And so then, you read the books and you come across things like this, which are the first one here from this book. It says, the most serious sleep problems we've encountered are associated with parents who sleep with their babies. And then you have this book, which says, most sleep problems can be either prevented or alleviated by sleeping with your baby. They're diametrically opposed pieces of advice. And those are just two books. And, there are another 200 of them that you could read, which all would say probably slightly different things. So it's this feeling of like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to find out what to do, right? What is the right thing to do? Who are my models or my guides? A lot of us are having a hard time with that. And then what is my authentic version of parenthood? What do I want to, what kind of parent do I want to be? What is the right thing to do for me? What is the right thing to do for my child? What is the right thing to do for my family? And how do I get in touch with that? How do I figure out what that is? And how do I trust it? You know, these are hard questions. We're gonna skip those. They're a little dark. Just dealing with, you know, death. So all of that, all of those things that, you know, that life and death, the figuring out what our ethical responsibilities are, the figuring out how to be in the world, how to be a human, how to teach our children how to be humans and good humans, whatever good means. We got to figure out what good means. We got to figure out what the purpose of life is. And then we somehow have to communicate that to our children and model it for them, even though we don't have good models. And of course we're overwhelmed. And of course, this version right here of like motherhood or parenthood, of like a joyful mom hugging a kid in a white room on a white couch, feels just sort of insulting. It just feels insulting. To me, it feels insulting. It's just like this vision of parenthood has so missed the mark of what this experience really is and what it is like. And yes, there are moments like this. There are moments of joyfulness, and there are moments of really intense, kind of blissed out, we're a family, we're together and we're happy. But there are moments, and then there's the rest of the day to deal with. And it comes with all of these questions that we've been talking about. So I want to say that I was dealing with all of this as a new parent myself. And looking at all those images of what parenthood's supposed to be, and really dealing with like the crisis of having a baby and wanting to find community, wanting to find other moms. So I went to one of these, which is like a new moms group, right? A new parent group. And I was just like, I got to meet other new parents, and I got to figure out how to get my baby to sleep. And so most of these groups are these kinds of experiences where you go and there's a bunch of like bleary-eyed people all holding their babies, and a woman is telling them, you know, how to comfort and soothe and get their baby to sleep. And what I found in those new moms groups is that they were really, really good for answering questions about like sleep and food and diapers and breastfeeding and all of the sort of like infant care stuff. And it was great to like get some tips there and to find other people who were worried about the same thing. But what I was really feeling was just this lack of space to talk about all of the big, overwhelming existential issues. The like, I'm afraid that my child's gonna die in the middle of the night, right? Like, is anyone else feeling that? I'm like gripped by fear. Anyone? No? Like, it just like, it didn't seem like those parent groups were like the right space for that. And because we're so weird in talking about those kinds of things in our culture in general, I felt like there just wasn't a space for it. I felt really incredibly lonely. And I also felt really angry that there was not a space for this, because it made me feel like, again, that white room, idealized, feathered glow version of parenthood was just, it felt like it was just missing the mark so badly. And I read this quote from this really extraordinary essay by a woman named Claudia Day. It's called Mothers as Makers of Death. And this quote from a woman named Samantha Hunt just like spoke to me what this was really about. So she says, the part of sexism that bores and angers me the most is the culling, the simplification of women into hallmark cards of femininity. When I became a mom, no one ever said, hey, you made a death. You made your children's deaths. Meanwhile, I could think of little else. It's scary to think of mothers as makers of death, but it sure gives them more power and complexity than one usually finds. And I think that's especially true of women and mothers, but certainly dads don't really talk about it either, right? It's not a thing that we talk about in parenthood, because parenthood is supposed to be sort of, I don't know, caretaking and separate from like the intellectual or deeply emotional, psychological spiritual experience of being a human, that somehow it's all about like diapers and, you know, pureed foods. But it's actually about this life and death. And we have stripped that away from our experience of parenthood, or our conversation around parenthood, which then leaves us feeling really lonely. We are all here feeling like we are the only ones dealing with this. And that is such a disservice to parents, right? So we're left here feeling not only overwhelmed and scared and grief-stricken and, you know, confused, but also feeling like we're incredibly alone in this because we're not that idealized version of what parenthood's supposed to look like. And so I really think that we need to change the way that we talk about parenthood in our culture. And I think it's important not only for parents, but it's important for us to take it more seriously. Like, this is the foundation of all human life. Like, it may not make money to talk about it today, which is probably part of the reason we don't discuss it in our capitalist system, right? We're talking about making an investment today for 20 years from now, when those children become adults and contribute to society in whatever way they do. As Marissa was talking about, I'm raising a child that I want to see contribute to the world. And that happens now. And so if it's happening now, we need to support that as a society now, both structurally and in our conversations. So I want to talk a little bit about some resources. First, I just want to say that, like, there are two kinds of resources I'm going to talk about: external and internal, in the sense of like looking for help out there and then looking sort of for help inside. And I want to acknowledge that some of the external resources we do not have control over as individuals, right? This is a cultural and a political project, right? And in the US, we've done a really poor job of prioritizing some of these resources. But I just feel like I need to put in a plug for them and say, paid family leave, really, really important. If you want people who are grappling with all of the things I've talked about to be able to do it in a way that feels sustainable and responsible, we need to support parents in this time. So we need to have paid family leave. Subsidized childcare for all of the same reasons, right? And right now, I think suddenly, like with the pandemic, the fact that parents need that has shown up in a really acute way. Community supports, that can look a lot of different ways: friends, parent, family support groups, paid childcare. Again, right now, because of our cascading disasters between the pandemic and the fires, getting that community support is harder than ever. So even if schools are not in session, and the idea that, like, well, you can call on a neighbor, you can call on family, travel is really hard right now. We can't rely on each other in the same way. And so we're having to make really difficult choices for how to do that. And so finding ways that we can do that as best we can, in these online ways, that support is not only in terms of care, but also in terms of community. So finding ways that we can do that, I think, is really important. And then, of course, provider support. There are providers, and there, in Portland where I live, there's lots of good providers that can give support to parents, new parents. Particularly, I want to just put a plug in for postpartum doulas. These are folks who come to your house in those early weeks, particularly postpartum, when things are especially challenging. And there are still postpartum doulas working in the pandemic. And a lot of them are, they know what's at stake, so they're being really careful. But that's another way that you can sort of get support for yourself. Again, all of this is complicated right now. But I think it's important for us to not forget that this is the village that we need to build, and we need to insist that our leaders and our politicians and our communities support us in building these resources for us, because our society depends on it. I mean, it really does. We're talking about human lives here, and we need to support them at the foundation if we're going to, you got to plant a good seed if you want a good tree to grow. So that's what we're doing here. I also want to put in a little plug for my Meaning of Motherhood course. So one external resource that I want to offer to you is this course called The Meaning of Motherhood, which I've developed an online version of because of the pandemic. I was teaching it here in Portland, Oregon. And now that it's online, it can be available to people all over the world. It's a 6-week course. It used to be 4 weeks in person, but I've expanded it because I think it warrants it. It felt a little rushed before. So it's going to be a 6-week course, and it's talking about all of the things that I've brought up today, but in more focused ways and kind of thematically. So we're going to be talking about grappling with the mortality of what it means to be a person. We're going to be talking about a lot of the messagings and mythologies around motherhood. And I should say that it is called The Meaning of Motherhood, and we're going to be focusing on sort of the social construction of mothers, right? Who are good moms and bad moms, and who are moms supposed to be. But that's not to say that people who are not moms can't take the course. If you are not a mom, but you're thinking about becoming one, that's been really fun, having like people who are considering motherhood in the class with people who are mothers. If you are the partner of a mother, yes, men can take the class too. And a lot of my students in the past have said, gosh, I really wish that my male partner would take this class. So take it together. I think it's great. The answer there is like, yes, men can take the course, and it is a course about mothers. So it is not about men, but they are certainly welcome to help to come and see the ways in which motherhood is constructed in our culture and the impact that has on the mothers in their lives. And of course, if you're a provider for mothers, if you yourself are a doula or an OB-GYN or therapist or something and are supporting mothers, you're welcome to come and take the class. Tomorrow is the last day for the early bird registration. So Monday, September 14th at midnight or 11:59 Pacific time is the last day for early bird. And if you sign up with a friend, you get 20% off. So I just want to put in a little plug for that. I'm really so very excited about this course, in part because I think it's going to be a really great online space for people to gather. And because it's online and virtual, it'll be sort of content and opportunities to have group discussion. There'll be 3 times of live sessions per week, and then all of it will be recorded, and you can watch it anytime and talk to other participants in a closed online community space where you can post and share and comment and all of those great things. So I think it's going to be great. I'm really thrilled about it. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask. And then I have a motherhood resource reading list, which I will send to the participants of this class. That's also part of the resource library of my motherhood course. And so I'll send you all a copy of that. Okay, anyone have any questions so far? Next, I'm going to talk about some of the sort of internal resources that we can tap into very quickly, and then we'll have a little bit of time to do a coaching session if anyone wants, and a Q&A. But I'll pause for a second. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to pop on with your audio or write it in the chat. Okay. All right. Doesn't look like any questions right now, but I will keep an eye on that chat if you do. Okay. So those are all the things, like, if our government can get it together enough to provide some of those things for us, that would be great. Until then, what do we do? right? So I want to talk a little bit about sort of the internal resources that you can draw upon. I think the first thing to remember is that sort of all of those existential concerns and all of those emotions that we are, that you experience during new parenthood, the important thing first to remember is that it's to be expected. And there is a woman by the name of Alexandra Sachs. She's a reproductive psychiatrist. She's done a great TED Talk on this concept of matrescence. And matrescence is a word that she actually kind of had to go back into the anthropological literature to find. And it is, it's a time in one's life when your body is doing strange and new things and changing rapidly, and your hormones are all over the place, and you have this new role in life that you don't quite understand, and you find yourself crying for no reason at all, and you feel sort of confused and overwhelmed, much like adolescence, except that it is also the period after a woman has given birth, right? That new mother period, the matrescence. There may be, I haven't done enough research to know if there is a patrescence word. I'm sure it is, may look a little different. But that's just to say that, like, we've written, you know, how many books have been written about adolescence? And we know that when kids are going through adolescence, we kind of like understand that they're just sort of like, you know, crazy people for a little while, and we kind of give them some grace. And we don't do that for moms when we ought to. Mothers ought to get that same kind of grace in that postpartum period, because it is very, very similar in terms of bodily changes, hormonal changes, new roles, overwhelming emotions, etc. So that's one. It's just to be expected, right? This, the second thing I want to say is that a lot of things that you are feeling are not a you problem, they are a structural problem. And the structural problem is that we do not talk about parenthood in this way, and we do not provide enough resources to parents to be able to grapple with these things in a way that feels supported. And so we're feeling alone, overwhelmed. We don't have the resources. This is not a you problem. This is a structural problem. So take a little bit of solace in that. I think a third thing is to advocate for yourself and ask for what you need as best you can, right? Unfortunately, the culture and here in the US, the kind of political climate that we live in is like, you know, we're rugged individuals. If you need something, you got to go out and get it. And I think that, you know, I myself had a very, very difficult postpartum period. I actually was hospitalized for 4 or 5 days with psychosis, which was not a great experience. And I really had to advocate for myself, and my partner had to advocate on behalf of me. But that's true. I mean, during the birthing process, during the prenatal process, right, in the postpartum period, we're left feeling like we have to advocate for ourselves because no one will do it for us. And I think that that's unfortunate. And yet, you know, here's your permission if you needed it. You got to do it. I think the other thing is share. Once I started sharing my story, right, when I was having a really hard time postpartum, and when I started talking about all of these things that I was grappling with, then suddenly people started coming out of the woodwork saying like, oh yeah, me too. Oh yeah, I think about death all the time. Oh yeah, like my mother dealt with this, you know, postpartum depression, or like the people I feel anxious, I can't sleep, right? All of these things just start coming out of the woodwork, and suddenly, even though you still feel all those things, at least you don't feel alone in them, right? So be as courageous as you can in sharing that part of yourself, because you will find community. I promise that you will, if you keep looking. Mindfulness, meditation, grounding tools, I found that to be a really great source of just support in these moments, in this overwhelming time. And we do a lot, you know, I do a bit of grounding work in my Meaning of Motherhood course, and just want to put a plug in for that as something to come back to. And finally, as best you can, trust yourself, you know, trust yourself, and figure out how to have that confidence that even if you don't know the answers, it's okay. And you don't have to be that perfect vision of the woman in the white room with the white couch who knows all the answers. It's okay to make mistakes, right? To give ourselves some grace as best we can. And I know that it's hard. It's hard for me too. But that, I think, is our journey to self-compassion, is our journey to what it means to be a person in a world full of suffering, and to teach our children to be people in a world full of suffering, is that we need to be kind to ourselves and be kind to others. And I think that's sort of what it's about. Okay, so I'll stop talking for a while. And I want to ask if anyone just wants to pop on and get a little bit of one-on-one conversation with me. If there's something that, something I said today that feels like it really hit a nerve for you, or something that you've been struggling with or grappling with, that you just would like to have a little bit more conversation around. You don't have to come on screen if you don't want to, but just say a little something.
I'm happy to do it if Sagita is not comfortable. But
sure.
Also would like to give you the chance.
No,
Sagita?
please go ahead.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Marissa.
I'll turn my video on as well.
Oh,
maybe.
Great. Hi.
Can you see me?
I can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm going to turn off my sharing so I can see you.
Oh, there we go. I've been multitasking, sorry.
Oh, that's right. Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for popping on. So what'd you think? How have you been? How's this been resonating with you?
Well, I mean, we already sort of talked about it with just the current state of the world and all of that. I think that's been sort of an ongoing theme for having a kid right now.
Yeah.
So my son is 2.5, just to give you a little context. So
yeah,
it's been a very tumultuous last couple of years. So it just seems nonstop. And like, there's constantly a new level of, oh, now we have to deal with this and we have to explain this. And, I felt very fortunate, especially with the pandemic, that he was younger. A lot of my coworkers have kids that are in that like 6 to 8 age, where they definitely feel the anxiety. They were a little bit more cognizant about being separated from their friends. And so I thought I was fortunate for that. But there's also so many ways that the world has changed completely, and he won't get the context around necessarily. So I also think about like, what is he missing out on that he just doesn't even know?
Mm. Like, what do you mean? What can you be more specific about that?
Well, developmentally has been a big piece of it. Like, he got pulled out of daycare right at that time that they start to flip into that more interactive play, and where he was starting to actually, I think, remember people a little bit more. And then all of a sudden he wasn't around anybody for several months. And that made him a little weird, a little bit more anxious. Like, if we'd see people when we were out walking, he'd be like, oh, there's people coming. And he would run away. And I'm like, well, we don't have to run away. So I worry a little bit about just the long-term effects of isolation during a key developmental time for him. He's back in daycare now, so that's great. But there's stuff like that I mean, we can't go to OMSI and play, and he misses out on some of those bigger interactive experiences as well.
Yeah, I think that's part of, I mean, it's just part of the grief that we're all feeling right now, right? It is this, it's just been a year of so much loss, in so many ways, big and small, right? Like, some people have lost loved ones and have lost their homes, have lost their businesses, have lost their livelihoods. And even if we haven't experienced those losses, we've lost our friends, we've lost our communities, we've lost our socializations, we've lost our trips to OMSI, to the museum. And there's just so much grief and pain around that. And I think, like, you have that grief on behalf of your child, like, he's missing out on this. I mean, he doesn't know the difference, right? At
Right.
this point. And so it's the grief that we feel, that, like, oh, I wanted him to have this, right? And I wanted him to, like, have this special time in his life. And we hope that eventually that will happen, but he's only going to be 2.5 once,
Right.
Yeah. And so there's a kind of intensity of that. I mean, the thing about parenthood is that, he's only going to be 2 once is true regardless of whatever else is going on in the world, right? And that kind of, I think even without all of the intensity of this year, there's a kind of grief that comes with watching our kids grow up,
Yeah, definitely. Like seeing the developmental milestones sort of like come and go.
Yeah.
And then they also start to get further and further apart, I think, as they get older. So you like,
Mm-hmm.
I love that, like, yeah, he's doing something new. And now it's like, well, he's kind of been doing these same things for a while. And I mean, he's always learning and he's always changing, but it is so intense when they're tiny and everything's happening in a matter of weeks
Mm-hmm.
instead of months or years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you look back at those pictures and it goes by like that. And you feel so, that kind of like bittersweet nostalgia
Mm-hmm.
that now is sort of kind of covered with this veneer of like, oh, you're going to look back at, and say, oh, that was the time when our city was, engulfed in wildfire smoke, right? Or that was the time when we experienced the incredible collective grief of loss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what would you say is something that you have been feeling particularly like tender about? Is there an example or a moment or a feeling that you've had recently? I know it's kind of a big ask.
Yeah, I was like, well, there's a lot. So let's, how much time do you have?
We got about 15 minutes.
I think the hardest part for me is not only was he getting to the point of interactive play, but I was getting to the point that I was getting better at play dates outside of daycare. We relied really heavily on daycare does all socialization. And then in the weekend, it was just survival mode. Our little family unit does what we need to do to get through the weekend. And then we send it back to daycare and he sees his friends. So I don't have a ton of local parent contacts necessarily. And so we were just sort of ramping up to like, okay, we interactive play dates make more sense to us instead of just 2 kids sort of rolling around on the floor, not caring about one another. And I found parents that I actually enjoy spending time with. And now we can't spend time with one another in the same way. So it's been a little bit of added loss for me, kind of at that ramp up of building a local community and having the world events sort of put that on pause because we can't interact safely.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal. I take our impact of spreading the virus in the world because we're moving around in the world very seriously, even if our friends are like, well, we don't care. I do.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of responsibility wrapped up in that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're such social creatures, right? Like we are, it's one of our basic human needs, I think, is to socialize and to find support and to find that community. And that kind of isolation that we are feeling as parents is intense. And again, another loss that we have to grieve. And I don't know that, I mean, as a parent of a 2.5-year-old, like it's hard to find time to grieve.
Yeah, it's fair.
Right? Or to even allow yourself space or to think that that is like the thing that you're allowed to do,
Mm-hmm. Well, and with the new working from home situation where like work is always there and it just feels like we are constantly going.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I do have time, I'm so spent. I don't have like any of the emotional energy left to even like go to that place because I'm just done.
Yeah.
I think that's another big challenge of the current time, is like all the 45-minute commute that I used to have that was like my time to be in my head and think through my own thoughts is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And for a while I was really good about doing a 20-minute walk in the mornings, and that was my like fake commute. But once he went back to daycare, like the timing changed, and now I don't do that anymore. And so there's a lot of just sort of me managing my own time in a way that still creates that space. And I haven't been able to figure it out
Mm-hmm.
in the latest phase of pandemic life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I find that it's like I hate the phrase self-care. I just really I just like so done with self-care because I'm like, look, first of all, a bubble bath does not solve anything. And two, I'm already caring for everybody else. And to feel like now I'm supposed to like do the work of caring for myself is exhausting. And yet at the same time, it's like, I think the ways that we have to do it right now are almost not even in like, I'm going to spend 20 minutes, going for a walk or journaling. It's like almost we have to do it in 20-second increments, where it's like you take a moment to kind of linger with the positive experiences of life and the pleasant experiences, even if it's only for 5 more seconds, like you wake up and you sort of linger with the pleasure of like being in a bed or you feed your kid breakfast and you linger with the pleasure of watching them eat Cheerios or whatever they're doing, right? And trying to stay in those moments of that feeling of pleasure or delight or safety or love or whatever it is. It's just like trying to extend that and take it in and let it sink in a little deeper just for 5 more seconds, and I think that that is one way to, without having to carve out extra time for yourself and feeling like this is yet another thing I gotta do, right, to kind of provide some support and robustness for that depleting well, is getting tiny little sips instead of like a big gulp. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I get that. And in listening to that, I think I realized I was doing better when he was home, and I would work for half the day and we would tag team childcare, and in the afternoon I would just get to do like undistracted mom time. And that's when I got to like take those, I was actually taking huge gulps of like, look at this kid do this fun art project that I wouldn't normally get to do because I would be working and he would be doing this at daycare. So I think I was actually thriving in a period when many people weren't. And now that he's back at school, I'm like, well, I don't have that access quite as much because he's only home for like the hour before school and then the hour and a half of meltdown mode before it's time for bed. So it's like, just don't have those same opportunities. So it is harder and harder to find even those little tiny sips. So that's a good call out. It's just like, what are those moments that I still have, and savoring them a little bit longer.
So what are they?
Yeah, I mean, it's short periods of like cuddling and reading a book before school. When once I hit work time, it's like I am just in work all the time. So I've tried to be better about like taking a break, walking away, lying down with the dog for a minute. And I think that needs to get scheduled in a little bit more, because I will go meeting to meeting, back to back the entire day. And that's just the way that it is right now. And so I do it. So those are the moments. And then that the whole exercise piece is going to be progressively more difficult as winter comes. So I think being more intentional about planning that time and figuring it out. Even if it means waking up earlier, I think that I need to do that. So those are, I mean, that's kind of it. Like, little
Mhm.
touch points with these tiny creatures that I love are probably my favorite things throughout the day.
Mhm.
I used to do a lot of baking, but now that it's just us locked in a house, that's not as productive. But I used to love bringing in baked goods to work and feeding everybody, and like that was another
Mhm.
big touch point for me, and feeling fulfilled, and that's been missing as well. So I haven't figured out how to replace that without being really unhealthy.
Yeah, right. Just like eating a bunch of cookies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could always deliver them to neighbors, I suppose. Um, I think so. Here's a question for you. And I ask because it's something that I have been realizing myself lately. I think that kind of like, yeah, I know I should exercise and like I know that I these things would be good for me and that they're like fulfilling. But there's it's like I feel like now because of the intensity of everything, I am seeing with a new kind of like clarity and insight that it's not that I should do these things because I should do them and they in like some um, abstract way will make me feel better. It's like I'm realizing that if I keep doing the way like the things that I'm doing, which is like sort of ignoring my own needs, it's like putting my hand on a hot stove. It just hurts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and I know that if I do the things, right, for me, it's like, movement, it's meditation, it's getting up with enough time in the morning to like have some time to myself, right? Whatever those things are, those like self-care things are just, they're like taking my hand off the hot stove. They actually just like feel better. And that is the reason to do them, not because of any kind of like, one needs to do this in order to be a healthy person. And
Mm-hmm.
so I guess I'm wondering where you are in that, like what if that.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the recognition that I needed to do the walk, is like it was time for me to not be doing all this other stuff, which just felt like just continually being bombarded by the thing, the next thing, and the thing that's going to follow. So I think that is really helpful. And it's not because I know that I need to, it's not because I'm worried about gaining weight in pandemic isolation. It's that I feel better. My body hurts if I don't do it. And I
Yes.
just gain so much from that effort.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more that it's a like negative reinforcement because I lose that discomfort.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's just like it's like taking the hand off the hot stove, right?
Mm-hmm.
It makes the hurting stop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's true of so many things, not only the like behavioral changes, but also the sort of stories that we tell ourselves about our parenting and about like what it means to be a good parent or the right parent, right? And we start to slowly over time realize which stories hurt and which ones don't, like which stories about um, motherhood in particular, like I think that there's this kind of sort of implied like moms are supposed to be selfless and compassionate and never get angry and all of these things that are just like totally overwhelming, and then every time you do any of those things it's just like another thing to beat yourself up with. And again, you find out which stories hurt and which ones don't, you know. And the ones that don't are generally, as I said at the end, I think the ones of like recognizing how hard everything is and giving yourself a break,
Mm-hmm.
and treating yourself with some kindness. Um, it's hard to do, but it's the same thing. It's the same kind of kindness that you show when you step away from the work and you say like, no, honey, stop. Just you need this break. Just take the break. It's okay, right? You're not failing as an employee. You're not failing as a parent. You're not failing as a person. You're just a human being trying to get through the day. And in order to get through the day without wanting, without hurting, this is what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, here, let me help you. Let's go do it. Let's go out. Let's go take the walk. And in so doing and developing that voice for ourselves, we learn to develop it with our children, and vice versa, I think. So what is your favorite kind of strategy right now for stopping the hurt?
Well, I mean physically hurting when I say stopping the hurt, because sitting in the desk chair for hours on end is hard.
Mm-hmm.
So just walks.
Mm-hmm.
We love on the weekends in particular, or if I have time, I take my son and we go to the forest. We go out to Tryon, and it's not like a strenuous walk, but just being out in nature. And we actually watched a show last night about parenting and about workaholics in other countries, and they went out to Japan, and they learned about forest bathing, which is really just going out into the forest and just being in the forest. I was like, sweet, they're going to go sit in a hot tub in the trees. No, they just walk in and they just breathe the air, and they take the time to slow down and observe. And you get to do that so well when you have a 2.5-year-old, because everything is like new and exciting, and we can walk the same path with the same fake animals in the learning center, and he doesn't care because it's all new and it's all fresh. And so I think that's been a really fun thing to start to do with him and build it into our regular routine. So that's where the wildfires have been particularly impactful, because outside is not an option. And so just losing that additional touch point of like engaging with the world in a really sort of fundamental way, just like appreciating the things and slowing down and finding delight in him exploring his world.
Yeah.
So it's been my favorite activity, I think, to do with him.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Marissa, for sharing with us and talking with me today.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I want to give a couple of minutes to, I'll put my screen share back up here. A couple minutes to see if anyone else has any questions in the last few minutes we have here. So I want to share my information there if you want to get in touch with me. And I do want to say that, so a couple things. I am now offering 90-minute, free 90-minute initial sessions with me. So, Marissa and I got to talk for about 20 minutes there. And that's just a small piece of obviously a 90-minute session with me. It's totally free, and there is an application. So I will be sending the application to participants today, along with that motherhood resource list. And yeah, I have 2 spots for free 90-minute sessions. So I'll send out, you can apply, and we can talk one-on-one. We do it by video chat the way we would do now. And then tomorrow, as I said, is the last day for early bird registration for my Meaning of Motherhood course. One-on-one sessions are great for going in deep and talking about whatever particular thing you want to work on with me. But I have to say, there is something truly magical about being in a space with other people and having a conversation about motherhood with other people who are grappling with the same sorts of existential and philosophical and really challenging issues that you're dealing with, and finding your fellow travelers on that journey. There is really nothing like kind of developing that community, and we all need that right now. And seeing the same people week after week and having that online community board, I think will feel really particularly supportive at this time in a very uncertain world. So I want to invite you again to sign up for my Meaning of Motherhood course. It's just at DanielleLaSusa.com. You can go to /moms, and all the information is there. All right, any last questions or concerns from anybody? Any last comments?
I don't want to start a very big topic, but on my mind heavily was the involvement with media for myself, and the pandemic has not helped at all. And I find myself constantly on some type of device, and even now, of course, this is part of the way to survive. But do you have any advice on how to reduce usage and avoid the what we're running away from, basically, while delving into the screens?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that it's this strange paradox because we go to the screens because do you find that you're when you're doing the media, are you doing it to try and get more news and information, take in more kind of stuff about what's happening in the world, or do you find that you do it in a sort of escapist way, or both?
I figured out that for me, the best way of coping is learning something new. So I've been consuming a lot of podcasts, and it's just a never-ending pit as well. You just don't know where to stop, and you just discover new things. It's just overwhelming. And I do it also when I'm with kids. I just have a podcast running, and I feel like I'm losing an experience with them too, but also I'm incredibly bored at times being around them, and no one talks about it too. But I find that way to solve it. But at some stage, of course, the guilt cripples in, and you have this whole disbalance between what's okay and what's not okay, and then the pandemic, and so a lot of topics coming together, as you know.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's an oversight. I should have put bored on that list of emotions that we feel, because I felt so bored, uh, especially when my daughter was younger. Man, I was just so bored. Um, and I know that I absolutely know the feeling of you're feeling like you're being pulled in two directions, because it's like there's being with your children, which can feel, like I said, intense and kind of boring. And then there's the wanting to escape or like engage your mind, learn something new, or be somewhere else, right? It's the discomfort of being where we are, where we want to just escape. And then we know that we're escaping and we're not really fully anywhere. And something inside of us knows that, right? And there's this kind of longing for more connection that we have, and we don't know how to do it because it feels so scary. And I think one thing that Marissa was talking about that children can provide is a kind of an excuse to slow down and um, pay more attention sort of on their wavelength, because they tend to move pretty slowly. It's like everything sort of unplugs. And I think if we're going to be with our kids in a way that we're really with them, we kind of have to do this like almost like internal unplugging. We have to kind of slow down and to be able to get on their level and be with the immediacy of the world around us. And it is both incredibly uncomfortable because we're constantly like, I'm up here, I'm reeling, I gotta feed the machine, I gotta keep going, and more, right? And then we get exhausted, and then we feel like we can't stop, and the exhaustion just makes us want to escape more, right? And then we take in, and we get more exhausted, we want to escape more, and then we just like wear ourselves out and crash into bed, and then feel sort of bad that we're not with our kids. And I think part of that, stopping that, is saying like, okay, I'm gonna give myself permission in the same way that I talked to Marissa about like taking little sips, is just saying like, I'm going to and I do this sometimes. I literally like set a timer on my watch for 3 minutes and it'll buzz when it's done. Like, it doesn't make any noise, so only I know that I'm doing this. But you could do it, you could do it on your phone or whatever, or just sort of set an internal glance at the clock. And I'll say for 3 minutes, just for 3 minutes, I'm going to be with my child. I'm going to turn off all of the external stuff, turn off the podcast, not think about work, not think about other things, but I'm going to try and actually be here and just watch them. And I don't have to add anything, and I don't have to like play with them in a certain way or get them to play in a certain way or ask them if they want things or try and get them to do anything. I'm just going to sit and watch them for 3 minutes. And you can feel that kind of unplugging happening. You can feel your like coming down. And because we, the nature of minds is to like get bored easily and run all over the place, we will find ourselves kind of distracted. Maybe within those 3 minutes, maybe we won't even make it 3 minutes, we'll make it 10 seconds and suddenly you're somewhere else again. But that's part of the practice of paying attention to our lives, is like coming back to right now in this moment and giving yourself permission in very small doses to do it. It doesn't have to be like, okay, for the next hour, I'm going to play with my kids, because like, that sounds exhausting. 3 minutes at a time, and just try it, experiment, see how it feels. What I have found is that it's really, it's like taking your hand off the hot stove. It just feels better. And you'll want to start to want to do it, I think, when you see that it can actually be permission to come down yourself and connect with your kids more. So that would be, I think, my piece of advice.
I love it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming today. This class, as I said, is being recorded, so you'll get a copy of it afterwards. And if you would like to apply for one of my 90-minute sessions, keep an eye out in your email over the next 24 hours. I'll be sending that application, and I'll be sending the motherhood resource list and a link to my Meaning of Motherhood class. And I hope you all stay well and stay safe and stay as grounded as you can in these challenging times. And next month, we're going to be doing transforming fear. I did some work on fear back in March when pandemic first all started. And at least in the West Coast of the US, it seems appropriate to be working with fear again. So I'm going to be doing my next free philosophy class next month on how to transform fear and treat fear as a peak experience. So I hope to see you then, and have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks, Danielle.